The story begins in Mexico, where a young boy named Miguel lives with his mother, Rosa. Ever since Miguel was a baby, his father has been gone, leaving Rosa as the only person in his world. Their small house and each other are all they have. Life is quiet and difficult, but Rosa does everything she can to protect her son from the harsh reality outside. One afternoon, while Rosa is cooking, her phone suddenly rings. On the other end is her cousin Carlos, and the fear in his voice is impossible to ignore. Carlos reveals that he stole a huge amount of money from a dangerous drug cartel, and now they are hunting him down. He urgently tells Rosa that there is no time left. He begs her to take the money, escape Mexico immediately, and disappear before the cartel reaches her too. But Carlos never gets the chance to run. Before he can escape, armed cartel members capture him and drag him before the ruthless cartel leader, Mauricio. The men brutally beat Carlos while Mauricio calmly watches. During the interrogation, they search his cell phone and discover the most recent call he made was to Rosa. Mauricio instantly realizes the stolen money is now with her. Without wasting another second, he decides Rosa must die before she escapes with the cash. Carlos is beaten mercilessly, and moments later, Mauricio orders his execution. With Carlos dead, the cartel's attention shifts directly toward Rosa and Miguel. Meanwhile, near the Arizona border between Mexico and the United States, a retired Marine named Jim Hansen spends his days patrolling the desert while taking care of his cattle ranch. Jim lives a lonely life filled with silence and routine. One day, while riding through the desert, he notices a group of immigrants trying to cross the border quietly. He reports the movement through his radio and follows them from a distance. As he moves through the dry brush, Jim discovers one of the immigrants left behind with an injured leg. The man cannot continue. Jim marks the location for border patrol and quietly returns home, his face carrying the exhaustion of a man who has seen too much in life. But more problems are waiting for him there. When Jim arrives at his ranch, he finds a bank official waiting outside. The man has come to discuss Jim's unpaid debt. Years earlier, Jim spent nearly everything paying for cancer treatment for his wife, who eventually died despite all the effort. The medical bills destroyed him financially, and now the bank threatens to foreclose on his house if he fails to pay soon. Jim pleads desperately for more time. He explains he just needs a few extra weeks, but the official offers no guarantees. The pressure continues to crush him. Later that day, Jim attempts to sell his cattle in hopes of gathering enough money to survive. Unfortunately, the rancher offers far less than expected. Even if Jim sells everything he owns, it still won't be enough to cover the debt hanging over him. Frustrated and emotionally drained, Jim heads to a bar looking for comfort at the bottom of a bottle. There, he unexpectedly meets his stepdaughter Sarah, who works as a border patrol officer. Jim admits his financial problems to her while drinking heavily. Sarah eventually drives him home, leaving him with nothing but another lost day and the same impossible debt. The next day, Rosa and Miguel flee through the desert carrying the stolen money. Behind them, Mauricio and his cartel men continue the hunt, slowly closing the distance. Exhausted and terrified, Rosa finally spots a hole in the border fence leading into the United States. As they prepare to cross, Jim happens to drive by and notices them. Knowing she is undocumented, Rosa begs Jim not to report them to Border Patrol. Before Jim can even respond, Mauricio and his armed men suddenly appear from behind the rocks and demand Rosa and Miguel be handed over immediately. Jim freezes for only a brief moment. Then he makes his choice. Instead of surrendering them, Jim decides to protect Rosa and Miguel, instantly turning himself into the cartel's enemy. Gunfire explodes across the desert. Jim grabs his rifle and fires at Mauricio's men, killing one of them during the chaos. He quickly forces Rosa and Miguel into his truck and speeds away across the desert terrain while bullets tear through the air behind them. Mauricio desperately tries to chase them down, but Jim manages to escape. Moments later, Mauricio receives devastating news. The cartel member Jim killed was actually Mauricio's own brother. Now the mission is no longer only about stolen money. It has become personal. Far from the shootout, Jim finally stops and realizes Rosa has been badly wounded by a gunshot. Her condition is critical, and her breathing grows weaker every minute. Knowing she is dying, Rosa pulls out a bag filled with money and gives Jim an address in Chicago. With tears in her eyes, she begs him to take Miguel to his grandmother. Jim says nothing. He simply listens while Rosa slowly takes her final breath. Now Miguel is alone, and Jim is left carrying a promise that will drag him into a dangerous journey across America. That night, doctors and police officers arrive at the scene. Sarah approaches Jim and informs him that Miguel will be taken to the station until authorities locate his remaining family members. Jim quietly agrees without arguing. The following day, Jim arrives at the border office with his loyal dog Jackson. While waiting in the parking lot, he notices a suspicious cartel vehicle nearby. Jim says nothing, but he instantly understands the danger has not disappeared. Curious, Jim opens Rosa's bag. Inside is a massive amount of cash. For a brief moment, temptation takes over him. Jim immediately drives toward the bank, thinking this money could finally erase his debt and save his ranch from foreclosure forever. But during the drive, he notices Rosa's blood still stained across the bag. The sight destroys his selfish thoughts. Jim remembers the promise he made to a dying mother. Unable to betray her, he turns the truck around and heads back toward the border office, determined to rescue Miguel before the cartel reaches him. When Jim arrives, he learns authorities are preparing to release Miguel to what they believe is his family. Standing outside, Jim watches carefully and instantly recognizes the truth. The people waiting are not family members. It is Mauricio and his men. Acting quickly, Jim waits for a distracted employee to answer a phone call. Using the opportunity, he quietly takes Miguel and slips away unnoticed. But Mauricio sees them leaving the parking lot together. At that exact moment, he understands Jim has chosen war. Mauricio decides to cross into the United States personally, no matter the consequences. He wants Jim dead and the money returned at any cost. Soon afterward, Jim returns home and hurriedly packs clothes, ammunition, supplies, and his rifle. Taking Miguel with him, he begins the long drive toward Chicago. At the same time, Mauricio and his cartel members illegally cross the border. Terrified by the cartel's reputation, several agents allow them to pass without resistance. Mauricio drives directly to Jim's ranch. Inside the house, he searches through Jim's belongings and discovers credit card papers along with an old Marine recognition plaque. Mauricio pockets the plaque as a reminder of the man he is hunting. Then he burns the entire house to the ground. Jim's only refuge disappears in flames. Determined to track him down, Mauricio contacts another cartel member operating inside the United States and orders him to trace Jim's credit card activity. Meanwhile, Jim stops at a gas station to refuel the truck and buy a road map leading toward Chicago. What he does not realize is that using his credit card has exposed his exact location to the cartel. Without wasting time, Mauricio and his gang arrive at the same gas station shortly afterward. Mauricio questions the female clerk and demands to know where Jim went. She refuses to cooperate and will not show him the security footage. Mauricio instantly loses patience. He brutally kills her. Afterward, he personally checks the security recordings and sees Jim's vehicle heading east. The chase now continues directly along the highway. Elsewhere on the road, a police officer suddenly pulls Jim over. The officer politely asks for his license, identification, and weapon permit. Jim cooperates honestly, explaining that he legally carries a firearm. The officer claims he needs to confiscate the weapon temporarily and asks to speak privately with Miguel. At first, Jim complies, but soon he notices something strange. The officer secretly makes a phone call and avoids approaching Miguel afterward. Jim's instincts immediately tell him something is wrong. Confronting the officer, Jim quickly realizes the truth. The cartel bribed the policeman to locate them. Reacting instantly, Jim punches the officer hard and knocks him unconscious. He then orders Miguel to hide before Mauricio arrives. And it doesn't take long. Mauricio and his men soon appear at the scene and question the injured officer. But the man knows nothing. Jim and Miguel already escaped while he was unconscious. Enraged by another failure, Mauricio shoots the officer without hesitation. Before leaving the scene, Mauricio searches through the unconscious officer's belongings and discovers Jim's road map. He unfolds it carefully and studies the marked routes. Now he finally has a clearer idea of where Jim and Miguel are heading, and the hunt becomes even more focused. Meanwhile, Jim realizes he no longer has his rifle. Knowing he cannot survive another encounter defenseless, He stops at a gun shop along the highway and purchases a powerful shotgun. Unlike ordinary people, Jim knows exactly how to use such a weapon with deadly precision. Years of military experience have turned firearms into an extension of his instincts. As night falls, Jim rents a cheap motel room for himself, Miguel, and Jackson. Exhaustion finally catches up to them. For a few brief hours, silence replaces fear. But danger never sleeps. At exactly 2 a.m., Jim wakes up and quietly steps outside to walk Jackson. As he passes the reception area, his eyes suddenly freeze. Mauricio and his men are standing there. Jim reacts instantly without making a sound. He calmly backs away before anyone notices him. Returning to the room, he wakes Miguel and immediately calls the police, falsely reporting a robbery at the motel. He only wants one thing, a distraction that can buy them a few precious minutes. Without wasting time, Jim sneaks Miguel out through the back and hides with him inside nearby bushes. Seconds later, Mauricio and his cartel men storm into the motel room expecting to find them sleeping. But the room is empty. Mauricio's rage grows colder. Standing there, he promises aloud that the moment he gets Jim in front of him, he will kill him personally. Once the cartel members move farther away searching the property, Jim whispers to Miguel and tells him to get inside the car immediately. But before leaving, Jim turns back for Jackson. He refuses to abandon his loyal companion. Jackson spots Mauricio first. The dog begins barking fearlessly at the cartel leader, refusing to back down despite the danger. Then a gunshot cuts through the night. The barking stops instantly. Jim watches Jackson collapse onto the ground. Pain flashes across his face, but he forces himself to stay silent. Rage burns inside him, yet he knows he cannot risk Miguel's life by reacting. He swallows the grief, takes one painful breath, and drives away with Miguel. But Jackson's death leaves another wound inside Jim, one far deeper than anything visible. It does not bleed on the outside, yet it tears through him from within. Now the journey continues without his oldest companion. The following morning, Jim and Miguel stop near an empty field. Together, they dig into the dry earth and bury Jackson. Neither of them says much. They simply stand there quietly for a moment, honoring the friend they lost. Afterward, they enter a nearby church. Miguel wants to pray for his mother. Inside, a priest notices them and gently approaches Jim. He asks whether Miguel is his grandson. Jim quietly answers that someone he trusted asked him to protect the boy, but they are not related by blood. The priest studies Jim's tired face, but asks no further questions. After leaving the church, Jim receives a phone call from Sarah. She demands that he hand Miguel over to the police immediately. Sarah believes the boy will only be safe under official protection. But Jim refuses. He tells her clearly that he promised Rosa he would take Miguel to his family in Chicago himself. Without another word, he ends the call and continues driving. Elsewhere, Mauricio and the cartel discuss their next move. Mauricio wastes no time. Using Jim's stolen map, he notices a red line pointing directly toward Chicago, a route Miguel himself had marked earlier. Mauricio immediately contacts an allied cartel group operating inside the city and orders them to intercept Jim on the highway. The ambush begins taking shape many kilometers ahead. Eyes quietly watch from bridges and overpasses. Later that night, exhausted from non-stop driving, Jim and Miguel stop beneath a bridge. The cold air bites through their clothes, so they light a small fire to stay warm. But they have no proper fuel. To keep the flames alive, they burn part of the cartel's stolen money. The next morning, they return to the road and finally reach the outskirts of Chicago. As Jim drives across a highway, his instincts suddenly warn him again. Looking toward an overpass, he spots several men observing the road below. They found them. Realizing the trap is closing, Jim quickly changes direction and drives toward the countryside, hoping to avoid the ambush. But the maneuver only delays the inevitable. Mauricio and his men soon relocate them and confront Jim head-on along an isolated rural road. Jim violently turns the steering wheel and barely avoids a deadly collision. Mauricio's vehicle loses control and crashes into thick bushes beside the road. Jim accelerates hard, creating distance between them. Moments later, Mauricio and the surviving cartel members recover and continue the pursuit with even greater fury. Then the road rises toward a steep slope. Jim sees an opportunity. He suddenly stops the car on higher ground and grabs his rifle position carefully. Years of Marine training take over his body automatically. His sharp eye measures the wind, distance, and movement with deadly calm. Then he fires. The bullet strikes the driver of Mauricio's vehicle. The car instantly spins out of control and flips violently off the road. Mauricio and two surviving gunmen crawl out from the wreckage and take cover behind nearby debris. Jim quickly takes Miguel and hides inside an old hay shed nearby, choosing a position that offers both protection and visibility. From a narrow window inside the shed, Jim carefully lines up another shot and kills one of the hitmen. Only two enemies remain, but Jim needs a distraction to finish this. He tells Miguel to fire random shots from inside the shed, not to hit anyone, only to create noise and confusion. Miguel obeys. While the gunfire echoes, Jim quietly exits through the side and circles into a better firing angle. The plan works perfectly. Soon, Mauricio is left completely alone. Breathing heavily, filled with hatred, the cartel leader prepares for one final confrontation. Suddenly, Mauricio bursts into the warehouse unexpectedly, grabs Miguel, and presses a gun against the boy's head. He forces Jim to throw away his weapon immediately. Jim has no choice but to comply. Coldly and cruelly, Mauricio orders Miguel to shoot Jim himself. But Miguel remains calmer than expected. Earlier, while nobody noticed, he secretly removed all the cartridges from the gun. Now Miguel pulls the trigger. Nothing happens. That tiny moment changes everything. Jim instantly lunges at Mauricio, and the two men crash into each other in a brutal hand-to-hand fight. Punches, shoves, and violent blows echo through the shed as both struggle desperately for control. Trying to help, Miguel grabs another gun lying nearby and points it directly at Mauricio. The cartel leader stares back fearlessly and dares the boy to shoot him. But Jim does not want Miguel to carry that burden forever. Before the boy can act, Jim takes the gun from him and fires at Mauricio himself. The cartel leader collapses to the ground, wounded and defeated. As Mauricio lies there dying, Jim gives him one final choice. He can either die by Jim's hand or end it himself. After a long moment, Mauricio chooses the second option. With the cartel finally destroyed, Jim and Miguel continue the journey one last time. Eventually, they arrive at the Chicago address Rosa gave before her death. Jim tells Miguel to go knock on the door. When it opens, Miguel's aunt and grandmother stand there in shock before pulling him into their arms with relief and emotion. For the first time since the nightmare began, Miguel is finally safe. The boy turns around, looking for Jim. But Jim is already gone. He leaves behind nothing except silence and a promise fulfilled. Sometime later, Jim boards a bus alone. As he sits down, he presses his hand tightly against his stomach. During the fight with Mauricio, he suffered a deep stab wound that has only grown worse. Now he understands the truth. He is badly injured. Exhausted beyond words, Jim slowly closes his eyes and leans back against the seat while the sound of the engine hums through the night. And with that, the story comes to an end. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe to the channel.